KrakCast News is back for a show in October. Is it our first show? I think it is.
Not.
It's not our second.
Well, it's our first recording in October, but
if you want to get technical about it, first show recorded in October.
Technician here, so yeah.
Guys, that means the university students are back in town. Last night, I passed by at the mall. I passed by the MPK, the tram and bus office place, and there was a line of roughly 100 million students standing outside waiting to get their bus and tram passes. And I was thinking, it cost you guys 1 zloty and 70 grosha for a student ticket just to buy a one-off. Why don't you not wait in line for 3 or 4 hours, just go home and then come back when there's no line? Isn't your time worth more than 170?
I mean, they're not earning any money right now anyway. They're just wasting taxpayers' money, so they have nothing better to do. It's either that or go and get drunk somewhere else.
Ouch.
Well, actually, that's a very good substitute.
Dave, you feel the difference on the street and tram and bus traffic since the students have been back?
Not really, because I walk to work. It's bliss.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Well, I noticed it because in this building there's quite a lot of apartments that are occupied by students, and there's been an enormous number of suitcases and various items of predominantly IKEA furniture stationed in the hallways.
Must be a busy time at IKEA this week.
I think it's very, very confusing, actually, because there's one set of Stig or Stellengard that gets moved outside, and then another little family hatchback rolls upside with an identical set of Stig and Arlena. And
that standard little end table that everybody has. Yeah.
What you mean, like that one over there?
I have to say, though, they do give the city a better atmosphere. Remember when we used to always be in the bars in the city centre? It goes from being totally tourists to more of a university city again, and it's got that that young crazy party vibe. I think it's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Blue hair, Dr. Martin boots.
Let's jump into the news here, guys. We've talked about the airport a few times in the last few months about how it has outgrown its capacity, like a decade before it was supposed to, and so they're upgrading the terminal and things like this. But this deficit in terms of the capacity, the handling capacity of the airport also applies to the runways, but apparently there's some plans to do something about that now.
You could do a major job in Krakow Airport, couldn't you? I mean, a major job. Another runway, Mikey? 18,000 feet?
Yes, just under 3 kilometers, actually. That's what they're planning to install now. They've just had the environmental impact study done by the government, giving the green light for a new runway. Which, if all goes to plan, will be probably operational about 4 or 5 years. But, as you would expect, locals aren't very happy about that. Another runway means more sound, more noise pollution, more traffic. And people around Zhonski and Balice and that area have already started, lodging formal complaints, and this is going to go straight to the courts. But, this airport needs another runway. There's no two ways about it.
Okay, actually, I have a technical question about this. So I'm assuming that the new runway will be parallel to the existing one. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Right. I mean, at right angles would seem to be potentially dangerous. However, how is it going to work? Because at the moment what you have, the direction of travel on the runway is always constant. Whether you're landing or taking off, you always come in from the same way. To avoid
from east to west, I think. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. It is because if you're coming from, say, the UK, you have to go all the way over the city and like Navahuta, and then the plane swings around and lands. Now, both of these runways going to be going in the same direction. In which case, are you going to have planes landing simultaneously, which is probably fine? Are you also going to be having planes taking off simultaneously? In which case, the air traffic controllers have to make sure that one of those planes turns a little bit to the left, if it's on the left-hand runway, and the other one turns a little bit to the right, so that when they are off the ground, they don't, crash.
Anybody?
Actually, it is permissible for planes to take off and land more or less simultaneously, and yes, and it's taken into consideration which one is turning in what direction. But usually they're just staggered, so just as one is landing, another one is taking off.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes of interlude between each plane, but that can only be done when the runways are actually separated by a minimum distance. I think it's about 750 or 1,000 meters, and I'm not sure if if the second runway will be large enough for them to have the near simultaneous takeoff and landings to occur.
Because I've had this thing, and this was a few years ago. I think I was at Stansted or Luton, and I was in one of these kind of on the ground taxi queues waiting to take off, and just for a period of about 2 minutes, we were in a position such that I could see out the window and I could see the planes taking off and the planes landing on the same runway. And the thing that was enormously impressive was that really there was about a 45-second gap between an airplane landing, and then the next one in the queue going to the beginning of the runway, and then taxiing and taking off. It will be off the ground, and then less than a 45-second gap, and the next plane will be landing. So, I mean, these kind of air traffic controllers, they clearly know their stuff. It's an
incredible job, yeah. But also there's that point where, a plane is reaching a certain speed on the runway, it has to take off no matter what.
Yes.
That's V1, V2. And at that point, you can bring in another airport, another plane at the other end of the runway because, no matter what's happening with that first one that's taking off, that second one can now
the passenger traffic has increased so much, we all know that. And I guess it only makes sense that the number of people coming in the front door has to result in a greater capacity for landing and takeoffs. That makes sense. I get that. But at the same time, though, and we've all flown in and out of the airport here many times, have you ever been in a situation where the traffic was so backed up that you had to wait a long time to take off, or you had to circle the city over and over because you couldn't land?
No, the only time they've actually had delays here is usually due to the weather, not the actual
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. My experience as well. I've never had.
So I don't kind of.
I usually interrupt to disagree with you, but that was a good point. Yeah, I was just thinking that actually.
I mean, they're planning ahead though, because basically now they're they've reached the capacity of the terminal a few times, and they've increased the size of the terminal, but now they're slowly reaching the capacity of the actual runway. It won't make it any less
foggy.
But that's why they're supposed to introduce, which they've supposed to have introduced this for years, the radar system, which will allow them basically to land blind.
Mikey, that's a hobby horse of yours, and you're totally right about that. Why are they building another runway before they perfect the equipment that they already have there?
Alex Ferguson's at the end of the runway,
especially for an airport that seems really prone to being fogged in at certain times of the year, right? Dr. Mike, I think it was Dr. Mike, you mentioned that there are some communities close to the airport that are obviously upset about this potential for the second runway. They're maybe calling friends in the city government to try to stop it.
Comes to Poland. With wealth comes NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Exactly. But the thing is, and you see this in the newspaper quite a bit, people complaining about it, but there's a reason why the property they bought was so cheap. Right, this next to the airport. So they buy it, and then they want to shut down the airport. Any sympathy for these people?
No.
Mixed. I mean, about 20 years ago, some people were smart enough to see that the airport would become that popular, but a lot of people noticed, they're landing here every hour or two. There's a plane. Krakow's not a big city. It won't get that popular. But, if you bought land less than 20 years ago, you should have been prepared for this. There's definitely accommodations that can be made, say limiting nighttime flights and things like that.
In Dublin, we have these people, they buy a house near a football stadium and then they complain to the council and demand free tickets and kick up about the noise. And it's like, did you not see the football stadium before you bought it?
There's also another factor in all of this, which is that kind of modern airplane engines are something like 30% quieter now than they were, even 10, 15 years ago, which actually, of course, is somewhat connected with the whole Boeing 737 MAX kind of dodgy situation, because
they built the new engines
They built the new engines, and Airbus were using them, kind of people were buying Airbus because they were cheaper to run. And quieter and more popular, and so Boeing had to fit these engines, and then that kind of messed with the aerodynamics. And I realise we're getting off the subject slightly,
so
but nevertheless,
I want to have a quiet night's sleep. It's on their heads, those deaths.
Anyway, airplanes are much, much, much quieter than they used to be.
And even quieter when you've got a Bose QC25s, just saying, hashtag.
Let's move on to
subsidised housing for the hard of hearing.
Let's move on to something now. Dave, you're gonna give us an executive summary version of this for people who don't know anything about the Swiss franc crisis that took place here about, 10 years ago now, 12 years ago now?
Even longer than that. Back, when I first got
tell us what happened and then tell us what's in the news this week.
People used to buy their mortgages in Swiss francs because it was seen as a real stable currency. It's always been seen as a safe haven currency. People buy into it when there's shocks in the market. And the idea, and they actually did get much lower interest rates because the zloty at the time was seen as a much more volatile currency. But this came back to bite people in a massive way after the financial crash in 2008 when the ECB started pouring money into the market. That caused everybody to pour into the Swiss franc as a safe haven. And when that happened, the Swiss put a cap in 2011. They pegged themselves to the euro. And they maintained that by buying bonds in other denominations, which is expensive because they're spending their own currency. They're flooding the market with Swiss francs to buy them back. And in 2015, all of a sudden, they pulled the cap. And this was a strange decision. It caught everyone by surprise, and everybody was very confused. And basically, the Swiss franc shot up. So the reason they did it was actually to protect in the long run the price of their exports, even though conversely the currency did go up in the short term, because they knew the ECB were going to turn the taps on
all
again.
These people with a mortgage in Swiss francs.
Which they did. The ECB did then turn on the taps again. So they knew there was a huge pressure, a wave of money coming into the Swiss franc that they wouldn't be able to beat off to keep the peg. So they got out ahead of the game. That was what was happening, basically. Have I gone to...
Well, but did you mention that the Polish people who had these mortgages in francs, suddenly their payments doubled?
They got hit twice. They got hit from 2010 and 11 when the ECB turned the taps on until the cap came in. The cap leveled things off. Everyone got back on a level playing ground, and unfortunately that led to a systematic effect where the Polish banks hid these mortgages. They thought they could ride out this wave, and they thought the Swiss franc would be steady again for another 10 years, 20 years. And
so these people, these Polish people with these mortgages financed in francs, they call them Frankowicze as a class. They started some legal action to try to...
I think it's up to 500,000 mortgages possibly.
Is it that many?
Were bought in Swiss francs. So the ECJ has finally made a ruling. But actually, people are talking about it was a big win, but it wasn't a big win for the homeowners at all. All the ECJ ruling says is that there's no European law that prohibits someone appealing to the highest courts in Poland, and that those decisions will be held up by the EU. And there's 500 cases that were on suspension in the Polish Court of Appeals that will now be heard. And if the majority of them, if they start winning, then you'll see a flood of cases coming. This could cost the Polish banks years of profit.
So is this technically a victory? Does it really give them anything?
It could. Actually, this was a good day for the banks. They thought that the ECJ could have done what they have the power to do, which is to issue a ruling saying that they should be converted to zloty at a favourable interest rate. They did not do that. So it was a good day for the banks.
But we should mention exactly what the Frankowicze are going to court about, because the problem was, like, when you took out a loan or a mortgage in Swiss francs, you were tied to the bank when it came to actually, quote unquote, converting your zlotys into francs to pay off this mortgage. That was the problem. If you had to pay back 1,000 francs a month, for instance, but you couldn't go to the exchange place down the road and buy these francs and then come to your bank and pay it. No, you had to go to your bank with zlotys and buy francs from them at an exchange rate that they considered appropriate, which was usually not the most, not the fairest rate or not the most market friendly rate. That was basically how the banks were making up their money. They had, their spread was a little more favorable to them. And this is what the Frankowicze have gone to court for, saying, like, we were locked into this. We couldn't buy francs anywhere else. We were paying off these loans in zlotys anyway. So why can't we...
Sorry, Mike, wasn't part of their legal action also based on the accusation that they were kind of misled in a way as well?
They were misled, and then these clauses basically saying that they had to buy the Swiss francs from the bank they took a mortgage out with is now considered, by a lot of legal parties to have been illegal or to...
Yeah, but that's how they're looking to annul the contract. Yeah. They would have got cleaned out anyway, but they were getting cleaned out and getting a bit juiced by the banks, which they always do.
So maybe a small victory, but we're still far, far from any final resolution to this thing.
Like I say, John, it's a complicated thing. It didn't go... it was a good result, but it could have been better. The ECJ could have gone harder on it. So what would you call that? I don't know.
We'll wait for the next court decision, I guess.
It's all down to these 500 cases now. If these go well for the banks, I would expect their share price to recover and not to be any issues going forward. Probably a lot of people. I was wondering, Mikey, we were talking about this before the show, is there facility for class action lawsuits? I wonder if a few of these cases get won, will you start seeing some of the massive cases strung together towards the banks? It could go either way, yeah.
No, definitely class action lawsuits do exist in Poland. They're just not as popular as for instance, in the US. The question is, maybe the banks will be, more up for that kind of class action lawsuit, because then they can have everything, in one nice big package instead of like individual court cases. It just, we still have to see what's going to happen.
Anyway, it'd be nice to see people that intend on paying their mortgage off given a deal, because, come on, like, they've been rinsed enough, really, to have.
Also in the news this week, the death of Kornel Morawiecki. Kornel Morawiecki is the father of the Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki. But guys, the passing of Kornel Morawiecki is newsworthy for more than just the fact that he's the Prime Minister's father.
Because he was a ledge.
He was considered a bit of a badass in his day. We talked a lot about him when we did our, profile of Prime Minister Morawiecki. So, everybody go back to that podcast to get a nice, more in-depth kind of discussion.
Available on iTunes.
And where all good podcasts are sold.
We sell them?
Where's my money?
Don't tell John. Mikey.
Secret's out, crap. We have to kill you now.
Should be up for at least $5 or $6.
Should really have a jingle for that bit, but I'll get to it.
Morawiecki, who's actually a physicist, that's actually already pretty cool in of itself, became involved in the anti-communist movements already back in the 60s and 70s, and he was pretty hardcore about it. Had his problems with the police, local government, but he was an academic, so, an educated one and well-connected, so treated quite well. But then in the early 80s, when you had Solidarność really picking up steam, he was part of that group that really didn't want to work with the communist regime. He didn't say that he wanted to, reform the system. He wanted to get rid of the complete system and began Solidarność Walcząca, so fighting solidarity. That was his group. He was arrested. He was mistreated. Then he finally, in the early 80s, when they did want to arrest him again, he disappeared. He basically spent the next several years, half a decade, in the 80s, going from friend's house to friend's house. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody would give him up. The police would actually capture his son, so the current Prime Minister Morawiecki, and basically try to force him to give up the information. Where's your dad?
It's some awful
gunpoint, wasn't it? I mean, this is
awful times, didn't he, in his teenage years with the cops?
Yeah, it's just knowing that the cops are around the corner at any moment can pick you up and so
Must have been scary.
So where's your dad? That was quite stressful. Finally, they caught up to him. But on medical grounds, they want to get rid of him because he was a problem. On medical grounds, they sent him outside of Poland. He didn't want to leave. And, they gave him a passport and a one-way ticket. He basically ended up getting a fake passport and through Austria getting back into Poland. So, this is one of those people that defect back into, past the Iron Curtain to, keep fighting the good fight. But this is just before the Round Table. He was one of those people opposed to the way the Round Table was run because he said, why do we have to work these people? They're about to fall apart. They're dead. They're gone. Don't negotiate with them. So he was opposed.
I have a similar feeling about the EU. But,
Just sit back, watch him die.
Dr. Mark, I saw a lot of coverage about the passing of Morawiecki this past week on all kinds of channels on television and different media. Was he the kind of guy that's kind of praised across the spectrum, or does he have friends and foes depending on where you stand?
A lot of people respected him and acknowledged his contribution in the 80s and his passion and his beliefs, but he was divisive in the sense that he had very strong opinions and not everybody agreed with him. I mean, some people want to compromise and work together. We have the other side and become more pragmatic. A lot of people thought of him as being, too conservative in certain views, a little too unproductive when it came to actually coming to some kind of joint agreements. Some people also said he was a little too arrogant. He was brought into the Sejm now during the last elections together with cookies, and then he, cheated when he was kind of voting, as in he asked for somebody else to vote in his name, which is completely illegal, and then he kind of got off the rails saying, why was this a problem, yada, yada, yada. He knew how I was going to vote in this situation anyway. He kind of acted as if, the rules didn't apply to him because he is who he is.
He's a physicist freedom fighter.
Well, in addition to all the useful information, actual facts that Dr. Mike just gave us, I just want to add that the family resemblance between father and son here is unbelievably strong. If you see these guys, their pictures next to each other, there's absolutely no doubt that these two are father and son. So that's my contribution to the conversation. Sorry.
He's an Ivy League smiler.
That's all I've got. Another death in the news this week, interesting and noteworthy for different reasons. A man named Karol Tendera, he was 98 years old, passed away. He was an Auschwitz survivor, and his passing is notable, guys, because he had a place in a big controversy that started, 6 or 7 years ago, that involved the use of the term Polish concentration camps.
Exactly. There was a documentary made by the German TV station ZDF, Our Mothers, Our Fathers. I think that's kind of what the translation would be. We're basically talking about the Holocaust and how the previous generation brought that about, where it kind of shifted a bit of the blame onto Poles as well being responsible. Plus, it also used the term on the website of, Polish death camps. And being a Auschwitz survivor, having spent 2 years there, he was not happy with that. He took it to the court and he battled this for years. They officially apologized, but he said, like, no, I want this apology to go out on TV, on the website, everywhere. So this went, back and forth in the courts. It wasn't not only this issue, but there were other situations where, other media outlets had used the same term as well. And he was kind of like the guy, on point and the media face, a poster kind of face of this fight against using the term Polish death camps and allowing the fact that saying that Poles were somehow collaborators or involved with the Holocaust. He always said, like, no, I was there. It was Germans that were, capturing people, torturing people, hanging people, beating people, killing people. It was the Germans. You cannot say otherwise. You cannot blame this on somebody else.
There is an extent to which, of course, this is slightly a semantic argument, and I emphasize that very carefully so that we don't get accused of being anti-semantic on this program. But I mean, remember, yeah, okay,
Zing.
He plays with words. It's what he does.
Yes. Well, our distinguished friend and colleague Jonathan Ornstein was on the show a year and a half or so ago, and he kind of pointed out this kind of like very specific distinction within the syntax of the Polish language, which kind of distinguishes between Polish death camps, i.e. death camps that are run by Poles, and Polish death camps, which are death camps that are based in Poland. And there was, either a deliberate blurring of this kind of understanding, or it was something that just didn't kind of, got lost in translation.
And sometimes flat out just say the wrong thing. They just say,
oh, well, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to read out the quote. Mikey kind of covered that. Was beautiful, Mikey. But this is a quote I dug up from him. He said, "I was detained in 3 camps. In all of them, those were Germans, not Poles, who hung, beat, tortured and burnt other people. One cannot allow them to shout us over, to say it was a mistake. I will not accept or agree to that."
Yeah, we've touched on this topic a couple of times on our show, and I think we agreed that when it is used, and because it pops up still in the media even today, when it is used, it's the result of laziness and just stupidity, not really malice. I don't know if that excuses it exactly.
I agree. I think, I since we started doing the show, we've covered pieces like this and spoken to people. I understand way more now why it gets people, but that was always my initial reaction, like when the Obama thing happened. It's like, you can't possibly think he meant it.
Well, hold on a minute. Do we ever hear about...
No better.
Yes, exactly. And I appreciate that side a lot more now.
Do we ever hear about Lithuanian death camps or Belarusian death camps?
No, exactly. And the whole thing is...
maybe they have their own in like those
because
countries.
No.
Okay, like maybe they have their own version of this there. I'm not sure.
But the thing is, this is often also mentioned in articles that seem to bring about statements suggesting Polish collaboration or that Poles are also anti-Semitic. And you have to remember, this was not really the case of Poland. In Poland, it was it was the few regions of occupied Europe where there was the death penalty for helping Jews or giving them any type of assistance when they were, in France, you were given a fine, and in France you had collaborators. The French resistance, which in Anglo-Saxon or like Western pop culture is shown as this big fighting force, pales in comparison to the Home Army in Poland.
And the great irony,
they freaking had the Vichy government there for half the time.
And the great irony for me, it was actually Poland fully embracing historicism in their past. That brought stuff like Yedwani and the chaos of post-World War II. Some shit happened, of course. All over Europe there were pogroms on the small scale. There were all sorts of things happening in the transportation. People trying to get back to their homelands, who owned what, who's going to live where. I mean, it was chaos,
An interesting footnote to all of this, which I think is not just conveniently forgotten, but actually is little known these days, is that the Weimar Republic in Germany, which is obviously what preceded the more notorious regime of the 20th century, actually enacted anti-hate speech laws specifically to protect German Jewish citizens. They had legislation on their books to protect anti-Semitic speech in the early 1930s, which I think is as clear a demonstration as anything that this kind of legislation does absolutely no good whatsoever.
That's kind of a scary thought considering the current political climate in most of Europe and the Western world right now.
A lot of heavy news today, and that's why we want to finish with a couple of things on the lighter side. Actually, this story is on the lighter side of things, even though it's a very, very serious subject, or at least a lot of people in Poland treat it very seriously. I'm talking about mushrooms.
Shrooms, man.
If you didn't know this, if you're kind of new to the Polish culture, mushroom gathering or hunting or whatever you call it is a very, very big deal. And the peak season for this started about 2 weeks ago, Mike.
Yeah, it's true. I remember actually. I think I mentioned this last year because this happens yearly. As a kid, I was raised in Australia, and then we lived in the U.S. And I just thought it was the weirdest thing. My parents would like grab me and go with their other friends at the beginning of fall, autumn. And we go to the middle of the forest and spend several hours looking at the ground.
What are we doing here?
I know. Remember, this is like before you could have a cell phone with you that played music and YouTube videos. You're just walking around like, what the hell? I didn't like mushrooms back then. So being out in the cold and rain and looking for pieces of crap between rotten leaves wasn't really my idea of fun.
But it seems like a good chunk of the country, just love to do it.
I always
hour
thought
after
you were
hour.
a fun guy, Mike. Yeah.
Dave, what's your position on mushrooms?
Well, where I'm from, mushy season is a little different. It's not quite as quaint, I'm afraid. Where I'm from is right at the
Wily Peyote, yeah.
Well, I'm from a suburb of Dublin. It's about 8 miles from the city centre, right at the foothills of the Wicklow Mountains. And if you walk maybe 20, 30, 35 minutes from where I live, you enter what's considered one of the richest picking grounds for Liberty Cap magic mushrooms in the world. So, to me, mushy season is when all those scary people are tripping balls walking through my estate, looking like they're about to claw their eyes out, man. I've never gone near a psychedelic ever in my life. They are so powerful, they look like. I mean, we used to see them every September and October, Different
kind of mushrooms here, but the reason it's in the news is because, well, not only is it a big deal, people like to do it, but apparently all over the country, people have spotted like organized groups of people who are showing up at prime gathering spots for mushrooms.
Robbing mushrooms.
From cars and vans with Romanian license plates. So we're just assuming these are Romanians here. And they're going out kind of literally, muscling people out of the way, pushing people out of the way to gather these mushrooms. That we haven't addressed the business side of this. Some of these mushrooms go for 20 zlotys or more per kilo. And if you really get out there and hustle and put in a long day, you can make 1,000 zlotys a day doing this. This is big business. There's lots of money sitting on the ground. This attracts certain elements, I guess.
Are we sure these are not Hungarians kind of with cars with Romanian number plates just to kind of,
throw us off? Yeah.
Throw us off the...
I didn't
mushroom
consider
mafia.
that, Josh.
I don't know. Actually, I have a mushroom anecdote which I will deliberately keep very, very short because if I don't, it will
You have
ramble.
a mushroom anecdote, okay.
This being mushroom season, and also probably all of our listeners will be aware that more or less about now is 30 years since the Berlin Wall came down, and actually the last time that I took magic mushrooms was in 1989, about this time of year, and I was absolutely hornswoggled by the sight of the Berlin Wall coming down. That was the best.
You thought you were watching a Pink Floyd video, yeah?
I did think I was watching a Pink Floyd video, yeah.
No Romanians involved? Hungarians? No?
Hungarians with fake Romanian cars, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They grow naturally all over Ireland, have done for
in their Dachas.
thousands of years, like I would say. People.
But just to be clear, the ones we're talking about in Poland are the more conventional, kitchen-oriented.
Your scrambled eggs.
By the way, Dr. Mike, with people who gather all these mushrooms and they just do it for personal, they're going to keep them. They're not going to sell them. What do you do with that many mushrooms? What do you make? Soup?
Basically, it's like soup or scrambled eggs. You get a basket. You can dry them out as well to make.
Just fry them.
But it's fine. But very often people dry them out, and then for like
bacon in this country. I mean,
over the winter, then you can make soup out of them because you throw them into the water, boil it, and you can do anything you want with them.
I was assured by a guy on our estate called Johnny Drugs that the best way to get as high as possible off Liberty Caps is to get about 25 of them and boil them into a tea, and then wait till it cools down and lash the whole thing.
His name was Johnny Drugs.
Yeah.
Yes, that was his born name, kind of. It wasn't even assumed. And let me tell you that, like, magic mushroom tea tastes so vile. It's just
I was famously vile. I've never sipped it, but famously vile.
Last thing in the news this week, Dave. This is your favorite subject. You love
ski jumping.
His other favorite subject. He loves mountaineering and people who climb mountains. This is ripe prime rant territory, Dave.
I'm just saying, it's a great name, the Golden Ice Axe. It's like
There's an award ceremony in Poland last week recognizing people from the world of mountaineering.
I thought it was like from the world of Trotsky and assassination attempts.
Yeah, and what did he win it for? I know I suggested doing this, but I thought you'd be
the guy hit all the 8,000. Is it meters or feet? I guess it would be feet.
Meters.
Sorry, yeah, of course.
In the Himalayas, it'll be the meters.
All the 8,000 meter peaks in the world. I don't know how many that is. It doesn't specify. But
what was his name again?
Krzysztof Wielicki.
He's won the Golden Ice Axe.
The Golden Ice Axe, which is To be fair, a badass name.
Ice, you know?
That is a badass name.
Yeah, it's a bit bendy, I should think. It's
reminds me,
soft and malleable.
Do you remember the Father Ted episode where Ted wins the Golden Cleric?
Oh, yes.
He gets him and tells off all his
Just for
rivals.
anybody who missed your original rant, can you kind of give us the bullet point version of why you hate mountaineering people?
I just don't think it's something to be admired for a grown man to turn around and go, especially if they have a family, and go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spend my life savings climbing up
A mountain that somebody has already climbed.
that I might die on, and I'm going to drag a bunch of poor old Sherpas up there with me too, even though they told me not to do it. They told me not to do it, but here I am, littering another mountain.
And Poland has a pretty, I don't know what the right word is, but pretty kind of well-developed, respected, established mountaineering culture.
What is the point of it, though? I mean, seriously. And nowadays, they're just taking the piss. Yeah, let's climb it backwards in January. You know, like, I mean, who cares? Like, you know, seriously.
On one leg.
Without oxygen, with, I don't know, laughing gas.
Everybody wants to be the first to do something, right? The first
to climb Everest,
the
giggling
first to-
hysterically.
I don't know why I'm bringing
on
it
their
back
hands.
to this, but the reason I always try and tell you how important football is because it's like stuff like, you know.
Things about football.
Yeah,
with you.
well, will you just stay with me? Stay with me, John, okay?
I have
Focus.
to. I'm
Stop
in the
looking
same
at your
room.
laptop,
Oh,
okay?
I'm okay. I'm all right.
How many
You're
people?
losing us.
Yeah, my
How
full
many
attention.
people ever get the financing, the time, the preparation, and mostly the money to try and climb one of these mountains?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a lot of money.
Everybody plays football. That's what I mean. That's
Well,
why
I do not get
that's
the
why
connection at
That's
all.
why I have such respect for people who can distinguish themselves in a field or a sport that millions and millions and millions of people love and try and do well. You know, that's why the team sports will always be the ultimate.
So you don't
And I
believe in
hate
you don't
all
believe
this.
in the
Look at
idea
me.
that you climb it because it's there. It's a challenge.
Look, climb it because it's there, but don't expect an axe covered in 24-karat gold for your efforts. Okay,
This guy got one.
Do it quietly. All right, except for that guy who climbed up El Capitan with his, when he was doing. I seen that thing on Netflix. Now I like him. Now he was very good.
But no, I mean, the because it's their
Move
quote.
his fingers and everything.
Because it's their quotation came, of course, from Sir Edmund Hillary, who's famous, of course, for Hillary Clinton being named after him, despite the
course.
fact that he
years
achieved that feat a few years
Everybody
after she
knows
was
that.
born.
That's reminded me of decisive.
But when asked
And
why,
Sherpa Tanzing,
well, yes.
such an old empire, hadn't you? You weren't going to mention him at all, was it?
That's absolutely
He was support
that's
staff,
absolutely untrue. It was far more important that I get my Hillary Clinton joke in before I
here we
sully the name of Sherpa Tenzing with the association. But anyway,
prepare the
enough
drum
talk
roll.
about the Kiwis.
Sherpa Tenzing. Yeah. But
Imperialist.
when asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, Sir Edmund Hillary, he probably wasn't even a sir then, said, because it's there. Now, that's an excellent answer, but it doesn't work for the second person to climb it because
Totally
somebody's
agree with
already climbed it. So,
Totally agree with you.
that's like a
But
busted.
Josh, do you know nobody's ever climbed K2 with one leg, no oxygen, listening
While
to
juggling.
Nirvana while juggling, and somebody will eventually, and they're going to give that man a gold-plated
Juggling
axe.
chainsaws.
I know at least one potential candidate who lives in this city.
With great respect. I met a dude once who we were renting a cabin up in Zakopane, and Anjay was his name, Kill Guy. He was telling me all about the mountain rescue lifestyle, the volunteer mountain rescue. I've great time for it. Great time for outdoor living, alpine life. It's a beautiful thing to celebrate having mountains. I love it all. I don't ski or anything. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. Go out there and enjoy yourself. Just don't do something that's so deliberately dangerous that you will probably die. And if you don't die, you accept me to celebrate you. I don't like that.
So how does that kind of
cheapens human
like?
life.
How does that balance in with like jumping off a skyscraper with an elastic band tied to your leg? I mean,
I don't respect people who do stuff like
I'll
that.
be to play devil's advocate here. The one way I could explain is that this is the same part of our psyche, as humans. Generally, we want to, push the envelope, go over the horizon, explore into the
All right,
jungle.
okay.
So it's in our genes, and that just expresses itself in the sense that then once in a while there are people like
Fair
just want to do something dangerous for the hell of it.
Fair enough, Mikey. Okay, but you're up on.
I still think it's dumb nowadays.
You're at base camp, right?
I know, but
You're at base camp, Mikey. Shh. What's Mrs. Dwoogie thinking? What's your mother thinking?
Oh, she would, my wife wouldn't let me go do it.
Is she
no.
sleeping? Is Mrs. Dwoogie asleep?
She doesn't like me coming here by myself.
I don't blame her. All the beers you sink.
hanging out with those evil KrakCast. But maybe we could introduce a new Olympic sport that kind of embraces all of these kind of like rather futile and like frankly banal exercises that we're so critical of. Envelope pushing. You have a standard Olympic envelope.
I'm going to step in right here. Wow. Okay, so after hating on mountaineering and mountaineers and the beauty of nature, I don't
you
think
knew where that was going, John. Right? Don't give it all down. Don't give it all the St. John taking back control.
Yeah,
you knew what was happening there. You knew what was going to happen.
That's it for the news this week, guys. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to give us a like on Facebook, share it, etc., etc. And we'll see you next week on the news.